The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Learned the terrible news that inflation is 35% above target. Again, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost of debt interest. And they can't do basic math over there. The 0.7 is actually a third higher than the 2% target. They're patting themselves on the back when they realize that Canadians can't afford to eat, heat, and house themselves. So why don't they, instead of quadrupling the carbon tax on the backs of Canadians, why don't they follow our common sense plan to suspend all gas and diesel tax until Labor Day?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader has quite proudly and publicly called for the Governor of the Bank of Canada to be fired. But maybe it's the Conservative leader who should lose his job, because he just revealed his astonishing ignorance of the Bank of Canada's inflation target. The Bank of Canada has a target of between 1% and 3%, and for 4 months in a row, inflation in Canada has been within that target.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Minister doesn't even know that the target is 2%, and perhaps one of the reasons why she's missing it. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Learned the terrible news that inflation is 35% above target. Again, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost of debt interest. And they can't do basic math over there. The 0.7 is actually a third higher than the 2% target. They're patting themselves on the back when they realize that Canadians can't afford to eat, heat, and house themselves. So why don't they, instead of quadrupling the carbon tax on the backs of Canadians, why don't they follow our common sense plan to suspend all gas and diesel tax until Labor Day?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader has quite proudly and publicly called for the Governor of the Bank of Canada to be fired. But maybe it's the Conservative leader who should lose his job, because he just revealed his astonishing ignorance of the Bank of Canada's inflation target. The Bank of Canada has a target of between 1% and 3%, and for 4 months in a row, inflation in Canada has been within that target.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Not only does the incompetent finance minister not know the inflation target, she doesn't know that you lock in low rates when you have the chance. Remember, the Prime Minister was saying, don't worry, we can double the national debt because interest rates are low. Yep. Glenn, problem is, I told him at the time that they should lock in those rates for 10 years or 30 years with long-term bonds. It turns out they didn't do that, and now $400 billion of that debt will roll over into these higher rates, forcing Canadians to spend more on interest than on health care. Why did he hire the worst mortgage broker in the world to be our finance minister?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
The Conservative leader is in a grouchy mood today. And I think we all know why. The only thing he knows how to do is talk down Canada. And what he just cannot bear is the reality that thanks to our fiscally responsible economic plan, inflation is at a 3-year low.
That's right.
Inflation has been within the Bank of Canada range for 4 months in a row. That's good news for Canada and Canadians.
That's right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Think that you pay down debt by borrowing more, that you stop inflation by printing money, and that you fight the drug overdose crisis by legalizing hard drugs. So at least they're consistent in their irrationality, Mr. Speaker. But now they've been forced to backtrack right before the election on their legalization of hard drugs because Canadians are revolting against the policy. Today we have a motion that will be voted in the House to permanently ban hard drugs. Will this government vote for that motion, or will they admit that they plan to legalize drugs again after the next election?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader is wearing more makeup than I am today. Now, I think it's wonderful.
I'm going to ask colleagues. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to withdraw that comment. We don't comment on the appearances of members. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I withdraw that comment.
Can continue with her. She has 25 seconds left on the clock for her answer.
The fact is, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader is phony all the way through. He is phony when it comes to his concern about the economy. All he can do is talk our country down. And he is phony when he talks about his concern about the opioids crisis. He tries to score cheap partisan points. It's just not right, Mr. Speaker.
That's right. Grenville, Thousand Island, and Rideau Lakes.
Last week we learned that 3 contractors involved in this Prime Minister's $60 million ArriveScam alone were awarded $1 billion. After 9 years, we know that this Prime Minister isn't worth that cost. But let's also talk about the corruption. One of those contractors who received $20 million in IT contracts but did no IT work had their doors kicked in by the RCMP. But what we also learned is that they were whining and dining senior officials from this very government. So we know that it cost $60 million. How many boozy dinners were involved in this $60 million scandal?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend knows very well that there are internal investigations taking place with respect to this matter. A number of people were properly called before parliamentary committees and came to testify. And of course, he also knows that the RCMP are looking into this matter. He made reference to that in an overly dramatic moment as well. So, Mr. Speaker, he should have the decency to let the police do their work. We've said from the beginning, anybody who misused taxpayers' money will be held to account, and I have confidence that the RCMP will do their work.
Absolutely.
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, the ad hoc committee concluded that the Prime Minister went to unprecedented lengths to hide the Winnipeg lab documents from Parliament to protect his government from political embarrassment. In other words, a cover-up. And the cover-up continues. Last week, Liberal and NDP MPs voted to shut down a parliamentary committee to get to the bottom of the cover-up. A cover-up of a cover-up by the cover-up coalition. A simple question, what are they hiding?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the Honourable Member across would be aware that his party was against any of the mechanisms that actually brought these documents to light. It was this government, in fact, I was the House Leader at the time, that made sure that we had an ad hoc process to make sure that there was a way to properly vet secure documents. And that's why these documents in full, unredacted, are available for everybody to see. Now, the Conservatives refuse to participate in that, and they continue to search for some way to pretend those documents aren't available. But to any Canadian, not just any parliamentarian who wants to see those documents, they are available in their entirety.